The sun hung high above Eric 7, a world notorious for its lethal landscapes and ruthless wildlife. Every year, the Galactic Federation held the most grueling survival test in the galaxy on this planet, a test designed to push its participants to the very limits of survival. Those who survived were deemed worthy, while those who didn't were simply forgotten by history. The test was not just a challenge, it was a way of weeding out the weak from the strong, ensuring only the most capable remained in the galaxy's power structures. For this year's survival trial, contestants from across the galaxy were gathered. Formidable alien species, well-trained soldiers and survival experts from planets where the environments themselves were deadly. Each contestant believed they had the edge. However, none of them expected the presence of the Deathworlders, humans from Earth. To many, the humans were a mystery. Earth was considered a backwater planet, filled with primitive creatures who had only just learned to travel beyond their own world. Yet these humans were part of the test, chosen to prove themselves against the galaxy's finest. And they were far from ordinary. The other participants were skeptical. How could humans, with their fragile bodies and limited technology, stand up to the deadly challenges that awaited them on Eric 7? The Federation had designed this test to break even the strongest of warriors, but it seemed that the humans had no intention of simply participating. They intended to conquer. As the participants gathered in the large staging area, the hum of anticipation filled the air. Each species stood in their respective groups, some in high-tech armor, others in ancient garb passed down through generations. The Deathworlders, however, stood apart from the crowd. They wore simple, practical clothing. Nothing flashy, nothing to suggest they were anything but ordinary. But there was a quiet confidence about them, something that made even the most experienced warriors pause for a moment. The announcer's voice echoed across the plains of Eric 7 as he outlined the first challenge of the test. Navigate through a vast, toxic jungle filled with dangerous creatures and volatile terrain. It was a death trap meant to test stamina, adaptability, and survival instincts. The test had broken the spirits of many contestants in the past, but the humans seemed unfazed. "Let the test begin," the announcer declared, and with that, the participants were off. The first part of the jungle was relatively straightforward: dense vegetation, poisonous thorns, and hostile weather. The heat was unbearable, and the air thick with humidity. But as the other contestants struggled to move through the jungle, the Deathworlders showed no signs of weakness. They had been trained for much worse. One of the human participants, a man named Lucas, led the way. His body moved with purpose, his eyes scanning the environment with the precision of a hunter. Behind him, the rest of the Deathworlders followed, with ease. They moved swiftly through the dense underbrush, avoiding the traps set by the environment. The aliens, however, were having trouble. They stumbled, tripped over roots, and were slowed by the weight of their gear. Some of them even began to panic as they realized how ruthless the planet's terrain was. But not the humans. They took it in stride. The Deathworlders knew how to adapt to their environment. Lucas stopped briefly to examine a patch of soil, checking for signs of poisonous plants before signaling the others to follow. With his knowledge of survival on Earth, Lucas could recognize danger from a distance. He knew how to use the environment to his advantage, and it was paying off. A few steps ahead, a massive vine shot out from the ground, aiming for the neck of one of the alien participants. The creature, a large reptilian species, froze in place, panic overtaking its senses. But Lucas reacted immediately. Without hesitation, he grabbed the vine and sliced it in half with a sharp blade. His swift action saved the alien's life, though the reptilian gave him a look of disdain. "Thanks," the alien muttered, but it was clear he was embarrassed. His pride had been bruised in front of the others, and more importantly, the humans had just demonstrated an incredible level of skill and awareness that the alien had not expected. The group continued forward, undeterred by the treacherous terrain. While the others struggled to keep up, the Deathworlders kept their focus. They encountered dangerous wildlife, giant insects, venom. The dense jungle of Eric 7 was more than just a treacherous environment. It was a battlefield. The planet's violent storms, unpredictable wildlife, and toxic plants created a world where only the strongest could survive. Every year, the Galactic Federation tested participants in this unforgiving arena, but this year was different. This year, the Deathworlders were here. As the first challenge began, the other contestants were already struggling to keep up. The jungle's heat was unbearable, and the constant shifting of the terrain made every step a challenge. The alien species, accustomed to their own planet's harsh environments, were not prepared for the unique dangers of Eric 7. The dense foliage seemed to close in on them, and the air was thick with humidity, making it hard to breathe. In a matter of hours, many were already exhausted, their energy quickly drained by the unforgiving conditions. Meanwhile, the Deathworlders, humans from Earth, moved with calm determination. They were unaffected by the environment's harshness. Where others stumbled, they moved effortlessly. They were experts at surviving in difficult conditions. They had grown up on a planet that was constantly fighting back against its inhabitants. Earth was a death world, and the humans who called it home had learned to adapt, to thrive where many others would have perished. Lucas, one of the human participants, was at the front of the group, leading them through the jungle. His face was calm, his movements precise. As he pushed forward, he used his sharp eyes to survey the environment around him, always alert for signs of danger. He stopped occasionally to adjust their path, avoiding hidden traps and steering them away from toxic plants that could have easily ended the test for any of the other species. The alien contestants watched from behind, struggling to keep up. One alien, a towering creature covered in thick armor-like skin, tried to push through the dense underbrush but was slowed down by the vines that seemed to reach out and grab at him. He grunted in frustration, but the Deathworlders were already a few steps ahead, their movements fluid and practiced. "What's their secret?" whispered an alien from a neighboring species, a small insect-like creature whose eyes were wide with disbelief. "How are they moving so fast?" Another alien, a humanoid with sharp, angular features, replied, "It's impossible. No species should be able to handle this terrain with such ease. The humans should be struggling like the rest of us." But the humans weren't struggling. Lucas and his team had adapted to Eric 7's environment in ways the other species could not even begin to understand. Their skills in survival, honed by years of living on a planet where every day was a fight for survival, gave them an advantage that the others lacked. They didn't waste energy fighting the environment. They worked with it. As the group continued, they encountered their first real challenge, a field of large carnivorous plants. These plants, native to Eric 7, had a reputation for being one of the deadliest obstacles in the jungle. They were covered in sharp, thorn-like protrusions that could easily pierce through even the toughest armor. Their tendrils were quick, snapping out at anything that came too close. The other contestants hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. The carnivorous plants had claimed the lives of many in previous tests. Most of the participants were too frightened to approach them, afraid that a single misstep could mean certain death. Lucas, however, didn't hesitate. He examined the plants carefully, his sharp eyes scanning their movements. He could see the pattern in how they reached out, how they reacted to movement. With a few hand gestures, he signaled his group to follow his lead. One by one, the humans moved carefully through the field, using their surroundings to shield them from the plant's reach. They stepped lightly, making minimal noise to avoid attracting attention. The other participants watched in stunned silence as the humans navigated the dangerous field with ease. The alien species had been too hesitant, too afraid to take the risks necessary to pass through. But the Deathworlders showed no fear. They moved as if they had done this 100 times before. By the time the other contestants made their way through, the humans had already crossed to the other side, their pace unbroken. "This is impossible," an alien muttered, watching the humans with wide eyes. "How did they do that?" "They didn't fight the plants," said another participant, an alien with shimmering scales. "They outsmarted them." It was clear now that the humans were not just surviving, they were thriving. As they continued through the jungle, they encountered even more obstacles. Thick rivers filled with dangerous creatures, sudden drops in temperature, and swirling storms that made visibility nearly impossible. But through it all, the Deathworlders pushed forward, never stopping, never slowing. As the hours passed, it became clear that the humans were not only surviving, they were gaining ground. While other participants struggled to keep up, the Deathworlders had crossed nearly half of the treacherous terrain. It was as if they were in their element, completely at ease with the challenges Eric-7 presented. The other species were beginning to realize something that had seemed impossible at first. The humans weren't just lucky. They weren't just good at surviving. They were better than the rest. Their adaptability, their resourcefulness, and their sheer determination were putting them far ahead of the competition. Lucas looked back at his group and smiled. "We're almost there. Just keep pushing." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of someone who had faced far worse than this. The rest of the group nodded, their spirits lifted by his calm leadership. They were starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could win this thing. But the road ahead was still long, and the jungle of Eric-7 had more surprises in store. The next trial was yet to come, and it was going to be even deadlier than anything they had faced so far. However, for the Deathworlders, it was just another challenge to conquer, and they weren't about to back down. Eric-7 was a world that lived to test its inhabitants. With every step the contestants took through its savage terrain, they were reminded that survival wasn't just about strength, it was about strategy, timing, and above all, the ability to adapt. The Deathworlders had already proven their resilience, but the real trial was only beginning. Now they would face the predators. The alien species, who had struggled through the jungle's dangers, were starting to feel the weight of their choices. Their bodies were bruised, their spirits broken, and their hope was fading. But for the humans, this new challenge was just another game to be played, another test to conquer. The Federation had designed the Predator Challenge to be the ultimate test of endurance and wit. On Eric-7, the apex predators were massive, powerful beasts, creatures that could tear through the toughest armor and hunt down anything that moved. The Federation had thought it would be a fitting challenge, one that would separate the weak from the strong. As the participants reached a clearing in the jungle, the ground began to rumble beneath them. Lucas, the human leader, stopped in his tracks, raising a hand to signal the group to halt. His sharp eyes scanned the horizon, but there was no sign of the predators, yet. The trees were eerily still, the air tense with the promise of danger. It was only a matter of time before the creatures emerged, and emerge they did. From the dense foliage, a huge shape burst into the clearing. It was a creature unlike anything the humans had ever seen. Massive, with skin that seemed to shimmer, like metal and claws that could easily shred through anything in their path. It was a hunter, a predator born to kill. Its eyes locked onto the humans, narrowing as it sized them up. It wasn't just looking for food, it was looking for a fight. Other species panicked, scrambling to take cover or form defensive lines. The alien contestants were clearly out of their element. They had seen predators before, but nothing like this. The sheer size and power of the creature left them frozen in fear. They didn't know how to fight it, how to protect themselves. They were lost, but the Deathworlders didn't flinch. Instead, they stepped forward, their movements calm and deliberate. Lucas drew a simple blade from his belt and crouched down, studying the creature's movements with the careful eyes of someone who had fought beasts far more dangerous than this one. "Stay close," he instructed his team, his voice low but confident. "We'll use the terrain to our advantage." The other humans followed his lead without hesitation, each of them moving with precision, positioning themselves strategically. They knew what to do. They had trained for this. Earth was a world full of predators, and the humans had learned to survive by outsmarting them. Now they would put that knowledge to the test. The creature lunged at them, its massive claws sweeping through the air with terrifying speed. The first human ducked under its strike, rolling to the side with a swift, practiced motion. Lucas and his team were already moving to flank the creature, working together to confuse and outmaneuver it. The creature growled, clearly frustrated. It was a powerful predator, but it was not used to prey that fought back. The humans were quick, using their environment to shield themselves from the creature's deadly claws. One of the humans, a woman named Maya, moved with speed and grace, leading the charge. She darted forward, distracting the creature long enough for the others to take their positions. "Now!" Lucas shouted, and at his command the humans struck. They didn't attack with brute force. They used their surroundings, their speed, and their teamwork. Maya leaped onto a nearby tree, using it as leverage to spring toward the creature's back. With a well-aimed strike, she managed to land, a blow on the creature's neck. It howled in pain, but the humans were already on the move again. The alien participants watched in stunned silence. The Deathworlders weren't just surviving, they were hunting the hunter. Every strike, every movement was calculated and deliberate. There was no fear in their eyes, only the cold focus of warriors who had seen and survived much worse. One by one, the humans weakened the creature, using their surroundings to their advantage. It tried to fight back, swiping at them with its claws and roaring in fury. But the Deathworlders were too quick, too clever. Eventually, with a final coordinated attack, the humans managed to bring the creature to the ground, rendering it unconscious. It wasn't dead, but it was defeated. Breathing heavily, Lucas stood over the creature, his eyes cold and calculating. "This is how it's done," he muttered, turning to the rest of the group. "No mercy." The other alien participants, who had watched in disbelief as the humans fought the creature with such skill and precision, now looked at them with a mix of awe and fear. They had underestimated the humans, assuming that they would be like the other species, unprepared, too weak to handle the dangers of Eric's 7. But the humans had proven them wrong. They had not only survived, they had dominated. As the creature regained consciousness and limped away, defeated but still alive, the Deathworlders moved on. They didn't celebrate, they didn't gloat, they simply pressed forward, continuing with the challenge as if nothing had happened. To them, it was just another trial, just another test of survival, and they had passed it with ease. The other species were left behind, their minds racing. They had seen the Deathworlders fight, not with raw strength but with strategy, with teamwork, and with the kind of cunning that could only come from a species that had faced constant threats on their homeworld. The Deathworlders had just turned the Predator challenge into a victory, but the real question was, how much more could they take? Eric 7 had many more surprises in store, and the Deathworlders were only just getting started. Eric 7 was relentless. The dangers were ever present, and the challenges just seemed to grow more difficult with every passing moment. After the Deathworlders' victory over the apex predator, the remaining alien participants began to realize just how much of an advantage the humans had. The jungle was alive with danger, and every step could bring them face to face with another deadly threat. The Deathworlders, however, continued to advance with unshakable confidence. As the group continued through the dense, toxic jungle, their minds were focused on one goal: surviving and completing the trial. The other contestants had been steadily falling behind, most unable to keep pace with the humans' swift, calculated movements. Yet something else had begun to stir beneath the surface: a sense of jealousy, resentment, and growing suspicion. Among the alien species was a particularly proud one, a group of towering, armored beings known as the Valkyrie. They were known for their superior strength and combat prowess. Their species had a long history of being at the top of the galactic food chain, and they saw the human success as an affront to their superiority. In their eyes, the Deathworlders were nothing more than an anomaly, a species from a primitive planet that didn't deserve the same recognition as those from the advanced, powerful civilizations that had been tested for centuries. As they trudged through the dense underbrush, the Valkyrie began to whisper amongst themselves. Their leader, Ritak, was particularly furious. His species had been humiliated by the humans' unexpected triumphs, and he was determined to put an end to it. He couldn't stand the idea of losing to a lesser species, especially one that had only recently discovered space travel. "Why should we let them continue? They shouldn't have made it this far," Ritak muttered to his closest allies. One of his lieutenants, a sharp-eyed Valkyrie named Vora, nodded in agreement. "Their strength is impressive, but it's clear that they're not as skilled as they believe. They don't know the true meaning of survival. If we sabotage them, we can regain control of the test." Ritak's eyes gleamed with dark satisfaction. Yes, we will make sure they never reach the final trial. It's time to show them that they are not as invincible as they think. With the decision made, the Vikiri began to set their plan into motion. Their goal was simple: undermine the Deathworlders and sabotage their progress. The jungle of Eric 7 was filled with traps, some natural, others placed by the Federation. But the Vikiri had a plan to rig one of the most dangerous parts of the test. They knew the Deathworlders would have to cross a precarious bridge that spanned a massive chasm, a gap so wide that even the bravest contestants would hesitate before crossing it. The Vikiri had been watching closely, studying the humans' movements. They knew exactly when the Deathworlders would attempt the crossing. It was the perfect time to strike. Meanwhile, Lucas and his team continued to press forward, unaware of the danger that lurked ahead. Their spirits were high after their victory over the Predator, and they believed they were getting closer to the end of the trial. The jungle's dense foliage began to clear, and the sounds of the Predators grew quieter. Lucas felt a sense of calm settle over him as he led his team toward the bridge. "Keep your eyes open," Lucas warned, his voice steady. "We don't know what's waiting for us next." Maya, walking beside him, nodded in agreement. "We'll be ready for whatever comes." They reached the bridge just as the sky darkened with the approach of another storm. The wind howled through the trees, and the ground trembled slightly beneath their feet. The bridge stretched out before them, narrow, old, and clearly not designed to carry large numbers. But they had no choice. It was the only way forward. As the humans began to cross the bridge, they moved with caution. The wind whipped around them, threatening to knock them off balance, but they had faced worse. Maya was the first to step onto the bridge, her movements fluid and calculated. Lucas followed closely behind, his eyes scanning every inch of the structure for signs of danger. But as they reached the halfway point, the ground beneath them suddenly gave way. A loud, cracking sound echoed through the air as a section of the bridge shattered, sending debris falling into the chasm below. The humans gasped in shock, their instincts kicking in as they scrambled to maintain their footing. Maya managed to catch hold of a rope that had been anchored to the side of the bridge, pulling herself back up with a swift motion. Lucas was right behind her, using his strength and agility to steady himself. But then they saw it. There was something wrong. The bridge wasn't simply old and unstable. It had been tampered with. Looking over the side, Lucas's sharp eyes noticed the telltale signs of sabotage: cut ropes, weakened supports, and marks that suggested the bridge had been rigged to fail at the precise moment the humans crossed. He turned to Maya, his face darkening. "We've been set up." Maya's jaw clenched. "By who?" Before she could answer, a shout rang out from behind them. "Look out!" The Vikiri had appeared on the far side of the bridge, their eyes gleaming with malice. They had been watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Ritak stepped forward, his voice booming across the chasm. "Did you think you could just walk through this challenge without consequences, humans?" Artak sneered. "You may have survived the jungle, but this is where your luck ends." The other Vikiri stood behind him, their expressions twisted with smug satisfaction. They had engineered the sabotage, and now they intended to watch the humans fail. But Lucas wasn't about to give up. "You think this will stop us?" he called back, his voice calm but firm. "We've been through worse, you'll regret this." With that, the Deathworlders sprang into action. Maya, already perched on the edge of the bridge, quickly worked to secure the ropes that were still intact. Lucas, with his team's support, began to make his way across the damaged bridge, using his strength and agility to outmaneuver the Vikiri's trap. The fight was far from over, and the Deathworlders weren't backing down. Not now, not ever. In this part, the tension rises as the Vikiri attempt to sabotage the humans' progress, betraying their trust and showing their resentment for the Deathworlders' success. The humans' resilience and quick thinking are highlighted once again as they adapt to the sabotage, refusing to let the Vikiri's treachery stand in their way. The conflict is heating up, setting the stage for a showdown that will challenge the Deathworlders like never before. The storm that had been threatening for hours finally broke. The sky above Eric 7 turned an ominous shade of gray, and the air became thick with electricity. The wind howled, bending the trees and shaking the branches, as if the planet itself were preparing to unleash its full fury. The Deathworlders, standing firm at the edge of the shattered bridge, exchanged glances. They had faced challenges before, but the final test of survival was now upon them. Lucas stood at the front, his eyes scanning the horizon. He could feel the shift in the atmosphere. The storm was more than just a weather event. It was a test, a challenge designed to push them beyond their limits. The Federation had set up this trial to test their endurance, their resourcefulness, and their will to survive. Eric 7 was not just a planet. It was a living, breathing organism that seemed to hate the very idea of life. But the Deathworlders were no strangers to such battles. Earth had taught them how to survive against overwhelming odds. "Stay focused," Lucas said quietly to his team, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We've been through worse. We just need to keep moving." Maya, who had been closest to the bridge's edge when it gave way, nodded. "We'll make it through this, just like we've made it through everything else." The team had grown, stronger with every trial, their bond forged in the fires of adversity. They had faced predators, traps, and now sabotage, but nothing had stopped them. The Valkyrie may have thought they had outsmarted them, but the Deathworlders had turned the tables on their attackers. Now, as the storm raged, the humans knew they needed to push forward no matter the cost. The final test was set in motion. A vast canyon stretched before them, the other side hidden in the thick, swirling clouds. It was a natural formation, carved into the landscape by centuries of violent storms, and it was the last obstacle standing between the Deathworlders and the final stage of the survival trial. The canyon was deep, its bottom lost in the shadows with no way of knowing what dangers lay hidden below. But the bridge that had once connected both sides was now destroyed, a victim of sabotage. The only way forward was across the canyon floor, where the storm had already begun to flood the path with rainwater, turning the once dry ground into a treacherous, slick mess. The Deathworlders could see no other choice but to descend into the canyon and face whatever awaited them there. "We'll have to move fast," Maya said, her eyes narrowing. "The rain's already rising." Lucas gave a sharp nod. "Let's keep moving. Stick together." The storm made it nearly impossible to hear anything above the roar of the wind, but they could feel the ground shaking beneath their feet. The rain lashed against their skin, cold and unforgiving, as they made their way down the canyon's steep slopes. The trail was narrow and treacherous, slick with mud and rushing water, but the humans' experience with survival was evident in every step they took. They moved quickly, fluidly, adapting to the conditions with ease. The other contestants, still struggling with their injuries from the earlier challenges, had long since fallen behind. But Lucas and his team pressed on, refusing to slow down. Each of them had been pushed to the edge during this trial, and each had survived by relying on their unique skills and their unshakable will to overcome any obstacle. As they reached the canyon floor, the ground beneath their feet seemed to shift. The water levels had risen rapidly, and the powerful current began to sweep away anything that wasn't firmly rooted. The air was thick with mist, and visibility was near zero. But Lucas didn't hesitate. He knew they had to keep moving, that the clock was ticking and the storm was only getting worse. "Move quickly," Lucas shouted, urging his team forward. They scrambled through the rising water, their legs burning from the strain. The terrain was uneven, with large rocks and boulders scattered throughout the canyon floor. They had to leap from rock to rock, careful not to slip into the rushing water. Every movement required precision, and every misstep could lead to disaster. The storm grew fiercer with every passing minute. The rain seemed to come down harder, the wind stronger. The entire canyon was alive with the sound of nature's fury, as if the planet itself were trying to drive them away. But the humans refused to be cowed. They moved together, supporting each other, never letting anyone fall behind. At one point, Maya slipped on the slick rocks, her foot catching on a sharp edge. She cried out in pain as she fell toward the water, but Lucas was there in an instant, grabbing her arm and pulling her back to safety. For a moment, they both stood there, drenched and breathless, staring at the rushing water below them. "You okay?" Lucas asked, his voice tight with concern. Maya nodded, shaking the water from her hair. "Yeah, let's keep going." The others were already ahead, pushing forward despite the odds. They were close, so close to the end of the trial. The canyon floor seemed to stretch on forever, but the humans knew they couldn't stop. The storm was relentless, but so were they, and they had come too far to turn back now. As they reached the end of the canyon, the sky cleared just long, enough for them to see the final stretch of the trial. Across the riverbank was a cliff, a natural boundary that separated the survivors from the final stage of the test. The river's current was strong and the path ahead was steep and slippery, but it was the last hurdle. They had made it. Lucas looked at his team, his eyes filled with a quiet determination. "We did it," he said, his voice barely audible, over the wind. "Now let's finish this." The storm had tested them, and so had the planet. But they had endured, their minds sharper, their bodies stronger. They had learned that survival wasn't just about strength. It was about never giving up, no matter how tough the challenge. With one last push, the Deathworlders made their way to the top of the cliff, their bodies exhausted but their spirits unbroken. As they stood there looking out over the canyon below, they knew the Federation had designed this test to kill them. But to the Deathworlders, it had been nothing more than another day on Earth, another battle to be won. And they had won. In this final part, the Deathworlders face the full fury of Eric 7's storm and the last most dangerous stage of the survival test. They navigate a treacherous canyon floor, battling against the rising waters and relentless storm. But their resilience and teamwork carry them through. As they reach the final stage of the test, their victory is hard-earned, showing just how far they've come and how well they've adapted to the harshest challenges. Olo Mini.